This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system that learned how to hide in plain sight, quietly, patiently, legally, until it wasn't. For years, you were told to watch the noise, the speeches, the outrage, the personalities, but none of that is where the real risk was accumulating. The danger grew somewhere colder. In balance sheets, in contracts no one reads, in money that doesn't stay in one place long enough to be seen. Nothing collapsed overnight. That's the problem. Because systems don't fail loudly at first. They fail silently. They fail by working exactly as designed long after they stop serving the public. If you've ever wondered how power survives consequences, this is where the answer starts. And if you're watching this, stay with me. What looks contained right now isn't, because once you see how this system actually functions, you can't unsee where it's heading. And that's where we need to go next. What actually controls the system now isn't ideology, it isn't elections, it isn't even law, at least not in the way most people think about law. It's liquidity. Money that can move faster than oversight, faster than borders, faster than accountability. Over time, power stopped sitting in offices and started flowing through structures. LLCs, trusts, shells, stacked inside shells. Entities designed not to create value, but to obscure it. When decisions are routed through that architecture, responsibility dissolves. No single signature matters. No single actor appears essential. Everything looks procedural, administrative, boring. That's how control changes hands without anyone voting. Not through force, through normalization. And once a system is optimized to protect movement of capital above all else, it begins to resist anything that slows it down. Regulation becomes friction. Transparency becomes threat. The public keeps arguing about personalities. Meanwhile, the system quietly recalibrates itself around one goal: survival. And that's when enforcement stops being a legal issue and starts becoming a stress test. We're about to see what happens when that test begins. This didn't happen all at once. That's what makes it dangerous. There was a time when financial power moved slowly. Paper trails mattered. Geography mattered. Mistakes left, marks. Then the shift happened. Quietly. Complexity replaced transparency. Speed replaced scrutiny. What used to raise alarms started getting labeled sophisticated. Before, moving money required explanation. Now it requires architecture. Before, risk sat on the balance sheet. Now it's distributed across jurisdictions, time zones, and legal gray space. And because nothing visibly broke, the change felt harmless. Even smart people adjusted. Banks adapted. Law firms optimized. Regulators learned to live with less visibility than they wanted. That's how normalization works. Not by convincing you something is good, but by exhausting you into accepting it. Slow change doesn't trigger panic. It triggers accommodation until the system reaches a point where the only way to understand what's happening is to unwind years of decisions that were never meant to be examined together. And once that process starts, it doesn't stay contained. Because the past doesn't like being audited, and it pushes back. Then the shock arrived. Not as a crash, as a concentration. Years of quiet movement suddenly visible all at once. Documents, records, devices, too many to explain away as coincidence. What mattered wasn't the number, it was the coordination. Multiple locations, simultaneous actions, a pace that signaled preparation, not reaction. This wasn't a hunt for a mistake. It was a sweep for a system. And when systems are exposed this way, institutions respond instinctively. Security tightens. Markets grow nervous. Emergency calls happen behind closed doors. Because everyone understands the same thing at the same time. If this much material exists, it didn't appear overnight. It accumulated, which means decisions were made, warnings were ignored, and benefits were extracted while oversight lagged behind. This moment isn't the story. It's the symptom, a visible rupture where something under pressure finally surfaced. And the most important detail is the one people rush past. This didn't target the margins. It went straight for the core. And once the core is touched, nothing around it stays stable. That's where the real consequences begin. Here's the mechanism most people miss. This isn't about hiding money. It's about moving responsibility. Value goes up in one context. It goes down in another. The same asset wears different numbers depending on who's asking. Loans want confidence. Taxes want humility. Insurance wants caution. So the system learns to speak multiple truths at once. Paper companies absorb risk. Consulting fees justify transfers. Employees exist on paper long enough to move funds, then disappear. Nothing looks illegal in isolation. That's the point. Each transaction has a rationale. Each document has a signature. Each step passes through a professional who can say, truthfully, this wasn't my decision. Benefits concentrate at the top. Exposure spreads outward. When profits flow, they move upward quickly. When consequences arrive, they move laterally, then downward. By the time accountability is discussed, the structure has already done its job. Money is elsewhere. Liability is diluted. Time has passed. And this is why enforcement doesn't feel like justice to the system. It feels like interference, because pulling on one thread doesn't reveal a single actor. It reveals how many people were required to make it all look normal. And once you see that, the next phase becomes unavoidable. Now the pace changes. Shorter timelines, tighter moves. Less room to explain. When pressure rises, systems don't reflect. They react. Records vanish. Communication shifts to channels designed to forget. Decisions get faster, not clearer. People who felt insulated start calculating distance. Who knows what, who signed what, who can be sacrificed. Because the moment leverage appears, loyalty becomes conditional. This is where complexity stops protecting anyone. It starts trapping them. Every layer that once obscured responsibility now multiplies exposure. Every workaround becomes evidence of intent. Every delay reads as consciousness. And suddenly, the same structure that moved money efficiently moves panic even faster. You can feel it in the silence. In the canceled meetings, in the advisors who stop returning calls, nothing public has collapsed yet. That's what makes this phase dangerous. Because escalation doesn't announce itself. It accelerates quietly, procedurally, relentlessly, and when it reaches a certain speed, no single decision can stop it. That's the moment we're approaching. This is where it reaches you. Not as a headline, as friction. You feel it when institutions hesitate. When approvals slow, when decisions that used to be routine suddenly require review. You feel it when markets flinch at uncertainty they can't model. When stability becomes conditional, when trust has to be recalculated instead of assumed. If you work inside a system like this, you already know the sensation, the quiet instruction to document more, to speak less, to be careful without being told why. Because when enforcement and finance collide, the cost doesn't land evenly. It never does. Those with insulation adjust strategy. Those without it absorb delay, stress, risk. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Systems under investigation don't pause. They externalize pressure, which means the longer this unfolds, the more ordinary people carry consequences for structures they never controlled. If you want to understand why this matters, don't look at the courtroom. Look at the ripple and stay with me. Because what's happening now doesn't stay contained inside one system. It spreads. This is the point where distance stops protecting anyone, because money doesn't respect borders and neither does instability. When financial structures stretch across jurisdictions, enforcement has to follow. And when it does, governments start talking to each other in ways they usually avoid. Records cross oceans, banking secrecy weakens. Neutral intermediaries get nervous. What began as a domestic problem becomes an international signal. Foreign institutions reassess exposure. Alliances quietly question reliability. Markets price in a risk they can't fully see, not because they know what will happen, but because they know something is happening. This is how local enforcement becomes global recalibration. Not through declarations, through caution. Capital gets more selective. Credit tightens. Partnerships stall. And once uncertainty enters the system at this scale, it doesn't need a verdict to do damage. It only needs time. Because every actor is now planning for multiple outcomes at once. Adjustment, withdrawal, containment. No one knows which path will dominate. And that's the problem. When systems prepare for instability, they help create it. And the next phase forces a choice that can't be deferred much longer. From here, the future stops being singular. There are 3 paths ahead. None of them are clean. The first is adjustment. The system absorbs the shock. Rules tighten just enough to restore confidence. Structures change names, not behavior. Stability returns, but narrower, more conditional. Nothing is solved. It's managed. The second path is erosion. Trust degrades slowly. Compliance becomes performative. Markets adapt to permanent uncertainty. Enforcement exists, but selectively. The system keeps functioning, but legitimacy thins. And then there's rupture. That's when pressure exceeds design. When cooperation turns into exposure, when documentation connects dots faster than narratives can contain them, rupture doesn't mean collapse overnight. It means cascading failure. One institution forces another to respond. One revelation reframes everything that came before it. Right now, all 3 paths are open. Which one dominates depends less on intent and more on momentum. Because systems don't choose futures rationally, they follow incentives until those incentives change. And the next move, whatever it is, won't announce which path we're on. You'll recognize it only in hindsight, which is why the final phase matters more than any verdict.